Anna, and thank you to everyone for dialing in and allowing me to present today. You can see the screen, the agenda on the screen in front of you. And so let's just go ahead and get started. 60 minutes goes by faster than you think. So let's talk about how to guarantee you will regret a hiring decision in general, but certainly in these circumstances. And the number one mistake in hiring, demonstrated over and over again, is, and that's actually been studied over and over again, that the number one mistake in hiring is in the absence of criteria of the knowledge and skills and abilities that you are looking for, that the person who has the most authority in the hiring decision will invariably hire the person that they like the most. And the person they like the most will be the person that they consider to be just like them. Now, human beings are hardwired to do this. We like people who are like us. In fact, I have been in sales, since I was 5 years old. And the number one, I had a little business at 5 years old. But the number one mistake, or the number one thing that we do in sales, and any salesman will tell you, is that you try and make people like you, because people will buy things off people that they like. And so you want to fit in, if you will, and when you go into an interview, all the interview books will tell you to be just like the people who are interviewing you as best as you can. If blue blazers are big there, maybe you should wear a blue blazer, even down to the point where some interview books will suggest sitting like the person, mirroring is what they call it, and trying to somewhat mimic their speech patterns. So, for example, if they talk about how their view is such, then you use the words, I can see that. And those two things are harder to do than you think. But manipulative people, whether they do it on purpose or they just do it, they're very good at it. And, but there's a fine line between presenting yourself well and fitting in and making people like you, because, they call those, people skills, right? Versus being inauthentic to the point where you're someone, this misrepresenting that you're not going to be this person that you're posing yourself to be. But that's the number one mistake in hiring. So you can clear up a lot of hiring mistakes just in general. And by that, the hiring group agreeing beforehand on what skills and talents and attributes you're looking for. And attributes are the hardest ones. Skills we can kind of see in a resume, assuming that it's truthful. We can see those in a resume generally or an application. And attributes, though, and we all have talents, attributes are what links skills and talents together. And we're going to talk more about that later on. And so you don't have to make this complicated. You don't have to put together a matrix that requires a project team that comes up with something incredibly complicated that administrative is such a nightmare that it collapses under its own administrative weight. No, you don't have to do that. You could just put together, unless you want to, unless you're big on matrices, all you have to do is put together a little sheet of paper where this is what we're looking for. And everyone who interviews the person ranks them on a scale of 1 to 5. I'm not a fan of any ranking that goes higher than 5 because it gives people too much wiggle room. When you start going 1 to 10, people get confused, too much wiggle room, don't accept quarter points. Keep it simple. And it's interesting when you look back on that, who will pop up often as really the best for the job, because the type of people we're going to be talking about today tend to interview very well. And we all know that, yeah, you do want someone who can present themselves properly, but at the same time, these types of individuals, they're very good at interviewing, whereas really authentic people tend to find a job interview to be a pretty stressful pressure cooker situation, and they don't always present themselves as someone who can, do the job. So you have to, I know that seems silly, it's like, shouldn't you be able to present yourself confidently as a person who can do the job? Well, they often will, someone will be completely different once you actually hire them. And all of a sudden, yeah, they are confident. Whereas these people, you hire them and then they can't because they're not who they presented themselves as. And so you want to spend some time constructing behavioral interviewing questions regarding attributes. And we're going to talk about a growth mentality and attributes. And so one of the attributes that we're going to talk about is curiosity, that you're looking for curious people, because curious people won't become stick in the muds for change. They'll be continual learners. They're not going to, we never do it that way, because they're kind of interested, they're kind of like the cat here on the desk. Well, what would happen if I did push that button? So you're looking for that. You won't have to drag them into an Excel training class. They'll go willingly. Let's go see what the thing will do. And so the idea behind behavioral interviewing is to construct a type of question that will put people in that situation. And they can be very complicated, or they can be really simple ones. Like a couple of simple ones I always ask people was, tell me something new you have learned in the last year, and it doesn't have to do anything with work. Maybe they learned how to play the guitar. And then I'll say, tell me some new work skill you've learned in the last year, and it can be anything. And they may tell me, well, I learned about accounting when I shadowed during vacations. Okay, all right. And then I'll say, tell me a new tech skill you've learned in the last year. And I don't care, it doesn't have to do anything with work. And maybe they'll say something about, well, I finally figured out how to send videos on my Android phone by text, because that's a hassle. And you're like, on an Android. So you're like, okay, so I want them to be learning something, or I can put together really complicated case study questions. And it should be more complicated. If you're hiring a vice president, that should be able to answer a case study question where you give them a business problem and then ask them how they would solve that. And so, but we tend to spend a lot of our interview on, so you graduated from Purdue. Okay, well, that's, unless they're lying to you, that's a given. We know that already. So spend some time talking about the things that you don't know. And we tend not to drill or probe. We let people not answer the question. I was doing some training up in Alaska, and we were doing training for interviewing. And so they put together some questions, and then I said, I'm going to play the part of, this person we'll call him a poser. And so I went up there and they asked me some questions and I gave them some really great answers, and they're like, oh man, that was really good, we'd hire you. And I said, y'all, did I answer your question? I said, really, did I answer any question that you asked me? And they said, well, you had good answers. I said, I had good answers, but I didn't answer your questions. And that's one commonality here, is these people will often not answer your question. They will give you a bunch of information. They will give you dazzling information. They won't answer your question. They'll tell you what they want you to know about them, and they may dance around the topic a little bit, but if it's not something they don't want to answer, they just don't. They go in another direction. They run down another rabbit hole. They can even get kind of aggravated if you keep circling back around, making them answer that question. So don't let people not answer your questions. Think about it. If you're going to go to a lot of trouble to get the hiring group to think about who we really need, what they have to have and be and do, then make sure they answer your questions. And this idea of fit lately, we want people who fit. Well, if you want a really good group of people and you want diversity, you're going to hire people who are different, not people. That gives a malfunctioning person a ticket to just, all I have to do is fit. I have to do the blue blazer. I have to talk about how I see your vision. I can see it right now. And I can just nonsense you right into getting a job. Now, another key takeaway here, other than they never answer your questions fully, they tell you what they want you to know, is it's about them. It's about them all the time. A friend of mine was telling me, she said, we got a job at my company. I want you to work there. I want you to at least talk to this person. And I said, okay. So I talked to the recruiter, and we got right past the pleasantries. Hi, how are you? Good. Thanks for asking. How are you? Oh, I'm good. And the woman launched right into, let me tell you about me. She actually said that. I almost laughed, and I decided right then that because I would have to supervise this person, that I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. And I told my friend afterwards, I said, she wants that job herself, and she said no, and she's not qualified for it. And then 6 weeks later, she sent me an image of the text where she got the job, and they said, oh my gosh, you were right. How did you know? I said, well, just because of the things that I'm telling you and we're talking about, I said, I just knew that. But yeah, actually said, that's really hard not to laugh when someone says just immediately, let me tell you about me, and then went off on it, and then they'll tell you a lot of personal things about themselves to build commonality. And so she told me about planning her wedding, and do you have any idea how much the cost of coffee is at hotels, and just on and on and on and on. It was an interesting experience. Yeah, let me tell you about me. And because there can never be enough about me with these people, because, you know, the whole world revolves around them, and it's their world, and we're just living in it, as the saying goes. And so get your questions figured out. Make them answer your questions. If they don't answer your question, keep going back to your question. And you'll find they might even say, for some of your higher level jobs, they might say, wow, that question's really important to you. And you say back, yes, indeed, it is. So do you want me to repeat it for you again? And no, I think and they'll say, oh, no, I think I understand what the question is. And then they'll look at you, and then they won't answer it again. And so you have to just keep being dogged. They keep going, and they're showing you a lot when they're acting like that. And make sure that you are, last bullet, sorry I went back, that you're drilling even into the simplest questions sufficiently. Excel is a great example these days, because if you have noticed all the Excel training skills classes, it's because nobody knows how to do Excel. And even worse, the worst part about this is not only do people not know how to do Excel, they don't have the math literacy to drive the problems that Excel would solve. But you ask somebody in an interview, are you good with Excel? And they say, yes. Or are you proficient with Excel? And they say yes. And sometimes that's just a mistake, because if you don't know what it will do, you think being able to type things into cells is proficient. But other times, people say, yes, absolutely, I'm an expert user on that. And then you don't define what an expert user is. And then they get in there and they can't do anything. And And so you didn't define it, and that, well, in my opinion, it was sufficient at my last position. And so, because they always have an excuse, there's no accountability. And so it was sufficient at my last position, and the last position was very similar even, and they'll often kind of like a pull a ranker on you, like, and my last position was an even higher rank than this one. And so, perhaps you didn't define exactly what it was that you wanted. And so they'll flip it back on you, and they'll always have an excuse, maybe pull a rank on you. But, in some respects, I should have asked, right? I'll learn next time to define what I mean by proficient. Oh, I wish I'd kept this really great article that I read one time about how a fellow had written on social media that most interviews are more like a Match.com date or an interview for the softball team. And by the time you get done, all you know is what you have in common and what position they could play on the summer softball team. And that is true. We think we'll find out a lot about somebody by small talk. And with these individuals, they love small talk because they're going to build connections with you, and they're going to tell you about them, and what they tell you about them is going to be a lot like you. And if you're talking all the time, then you don't give them a chance to do that. You don't give them a chance so that you can really see them acting like this. And think about the average interview. You go on an interview, or you see one of your managers doing this, and they say, okay, here's the job, and here's the job description, and here's what I think are the good things about the job, and here's who I think is going to fit in really well, and here's what kind of company we are, and here are our values. And this is I'm sure you've looked on the website, our mission statement. Well, you do not have to be the sharpest saw in the shed to parrot that back. So, tell me about yourself. Well, and then they will line everything back and mirror it back at you, and you think, excellent, they're going to be an excellent fit. Well, we're back to that. There's a fine line between people's skills and malfunctioning, isn't there? So, let them talk. In fact, interview books will say, keep the interviewer talking, so that you don't talk yourself out of the job as an applicant. Well, I want to give people a chance to either talk themselves into a job or talk themselves out of a job. And if I'm talking, that can't happen. And be silent. Give people a chance to answer your questions, so that those who don't interview really well have a chance to actually gather their thoughts and give you a good answer. It takes 8 seconds to answer a question that you don't have an answer to it right in the front of your file. But malfunctioning people, they tend to interview very well. And so make sure that you are using silence appropriately, and that you actually are not trying to do 2 or 3 things at once, which is hard to ask of people these days, that you concentrate and fully engage, because the nuances between people skills and posing are, they're pretty subtle. And one of the best ways that you can do this is to check in with everyone who encounters the applicant. And all the way back to, if you have valet parking, make friends with the valet in the parking garage. You want to see them, how they act when they think that no one is watching. And you want to see how they act with people who can't do anything for them. Check references and conduct your background checks. People lie, people lie, people lie. And these days it's really strange that there are frightening, I was going to say surprising, but it's more like frightening number of people who think that, well, if you don't catch them, it's not a lie. That's an interesting style of thinking, isn't it? And so you want to check their references. You want to conduct a background checks. those individuals who would have more to cover up, they lie more than those who don't. And so they have to kind of gloss things up. So there was a fellow one time who I Googled him, and he had been sued every place he'd ever worked for harassment. Somehow he got this amazingly good job. And I'm not going to give you the details of why I was looking into this, but it was from a headhunter. And the headhunter, I'm like, did they not know about the internet? You know, they were kind of an old school group of headhunters. Maybe they don't use, Google, because it was easy to find. It was all out there. Or there was perhaps the fact that they get paid a commission when they get somebody into a job. So maybe they were in cahoots a little bit, trying to, not knowing cahoots, but, wanting to get this person in there because then they get their commission, and in he slid to go and air on another day, right? So and we see them every day in the news. They're giving everybody what they want, and they're just sliding along right under the radar, aren't they? And usually it's because they're not being authentic, but they're giving people what they want. And so don't be swayed by looks or dress or language or, yes, you should be impressed by a resume, but don't be so swayed by how somebody looks or they dress or their language or their accent or their education that you overlook the things that you would normally look at in a person because they're so classy and they're so smart or, what have you. Consider an interview a fact-finding. I think hiring people is an investigation. Really, a background check is an investigation. An interview should be a fact-finding. It should be all about the details and not so much trying to find that needle in a haystack person, but rather to sort out all those who wouldn't be good in the job. And everyone considers themselves a good judge of people. And some people are, but I would say the majority of people aren't because they are swayed. And there's a saying, we were just talking about it, good watch, good shoes, good wallet. You can go anywhere. And most people are very swayed by the trappings of society. They put on an English accent and a Rolex, and you can go anywhere pretty much. People are swayed. For some reason, we're hardwired really to be swayed by that. And so those who would want to sway, that's why people buy Rolexes, just to impress people, most people. Unless you just want a good watch and reward yourself. But so don't be swayed by that. And when your gut is talking to you, your gut can help you when you become like what I call a critical observer of your gut. So, and what your gut actually is what's called your reptilian or your primal, or I think a really great name for it's your snake brain. And it's a little piece of your brain that sits right behind your eyeballs. And its only purpose is to keep you alive. And so it is really good at recognizing threats. It's not good at assessing a threat, but it's really good at recognizing them. And it will pick up if you are engaged in paying attention and really paying attention, it will pick up, oh, they didn't answer that, they didn't answer that question, or actually the way they answered this question contradicts an answer that they gave me before, and your reptilian brain picked up the fact that, well, they couldn't have done that because they would have had two jobs at the same time. So what's up with that? But see, your reptilian brain doesn't tell you that. It doesn't tell you, well, they would have had to have two jobs at once. It just kind of gives you that talking to you signal. And your bells are clanging, as we like to say, because it's picked something up. It's picked up someone who's double talking. Double talking people are a threat to the snake brain, and so it noticed that. So become a better observer of your gut. When your gut starts talking to you, what were we discussing? What was going on there? And actually, that saying that psychiatrists use of the eyes are the window to the soul, that's very true, because your eyes, I know it's as close to true as it's going to ever be, because science backs that up, because your eyes sit directly in front of that primal brain, and that primal brain doesn't lie very well. Remember, it's a snake brain. And how good liars are snakes, rattlesnakes, and that kind of thing. Okay, so anyway, keep asking about that which troubles you. If it bothers you, keep going over and over and over it again. And even if it seems to aggravate them, or they are evasive, or give different or confused answers, or try to slide out by saying something like, well, you're very interested in that question, or gosh, I didn't know I would be subject to this. Or another thing that they will often try to do is they'll try to slide out and start talking about something else that's, for example, very personal in a way, but it has nothing to do with the job. Like, well, my parents grew up poor and they started this business and I worked for them as a kid. And so they're trying to sway you or make you feel sorry for them, but they're trying to throw you off the track. Okay. Moving forward. And who's to say if they do this on purpose or they just do that? But you know what? It doesn't matter why. I'm not trying to study them for any type of project in school. I'm just trying to make some good hires here. So I don't necessarily care why. I just care about what. Keep good documentation on your interviewing questions. It's going to help you compare and contrast candidates afterwards with the rest of the hiring group. And you want facts. You want who and what and where and why and how and specific answers to your questions. If they're giving you different double talking answers, it'll pop up if you're keeping notes. And everyone who interviews a candidate should be keeping notes. And don't paraphrase and don't put your opinions in there because that's not a fact. And no subjective inflammatory words. You don't want to write short older fellow in there. I mean, you don't want to leave, like we like to say in the Midwest, a stick to hit you with, because it is documentation. It goes both ways. And then compare your notes with other interviewers. And I would suggest, since this is a fact finding, to ask the person a question and then write your answer down and then look at the answer. And if it's not completely answered, stay on that answer. And then when you're done writing it down, then ask another question. So don't ask a question and they start giving you an answer, and then you ask them another question while you're writing down the answer to number one. Just stay on one thing at a time. Write down the answer. If there's anything you want to clarify, go back over, then do it at that time while you're on the subject, and then moving on to the next question. But always remember, and I just kind of threw this slide in here as a gimme, what are we documenting? Why are we documenting? Who's going to see it? How will the documentation be used? You certainly don't want to, have everybody just keeping willy-nilly notes on their opinions of the people who came into the interview. That's not going to help you make good hires, and then that could come back to cause a problem for you one day. Okay, so is someone a fake good person? Well, one of the things that you'll notice is they watch you for your reaction rather than engaging with you. They're not having an authentic conversation, a connection with you, and that's why you need to pay attention to them. you will notice they watch you kind of, and if very intently. You may not be connecting with them, but they're connecting with you. And if they notice that you don't like the answer to that question, then they'll either go in a different direction, or they will change their answer, or they will temper their answer. Remember, there's a fine line between people skills versus manipulation. The one thing that I have over the years noticed is they're insistent on making sure you consider them a good or a trustworthy person. And they'll keep telling you this over and over again, to the point where your primal brain will start clanging, because it's thinking, the snake is thinking, well, why do they have to keep telling me how good a person? It's the you can't trust the people who always have to keep telling you that they're trustworthy. It's almost as if they're trying to convince themselves that they're good or trustworthy, because I assumed that they were when they walked in the door. So now that you have to keep shoveling it on to me, it makes me start to wonder, even to the point where one time I asked a fellow in an interview, you've mentioned to me 5 times that you're trustworthy. That's is very important to you, it appears. It certainly is important to me. Can you tell me why you told me 5 times how trustworthy you were? Boy, that went he didn't really even know. It's all about how you ask the question. You ask it nice, and he just got really frosty, and found out later on that we really dodged a mess with him, but just calling him on it. They give you so many, usually unasked for reasons as to why they are good or trustworthy or honest person. And they do tend to have extraordinarily good eye contact with the earnest stare, at least until you do, and then all of a sudden they start looking all over. Now, there can be diversity reasons for not having good eye contact. Some cultures consider to be looking straight in someone's eyes all the time to be aggressive. But you can't even assume that for one group of people, everyone of that culture, has eye contact of one sort or another. So you can't just make blanket judgments on that. But they keep the reason that they have extraordinarily good eye contact is they want to watch you. And then when you start having extraordinarily good eye contact, really watching them, the better to see you with, my dear. To quote, what was that? Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf. And yeah, there's something to these fairy tales, isn't there? Then all of a sudden, when you start watching them, all of a sudden that really kind of throws them off. And another huge thing for me is no courtesy. And we're going to talk about this later on. And I know that sounds strange to you, but people who don't have any courtesy, they don't have empathy. They never think of how what they do, even the little things, affect other people. And so therefore, if they never think about how anything affects anyone else, and they can never put themselves in anybody else's shoes, they can't take accountability, and they aren't responsible, and you can't trust them, and you can't ever correct them or redirect them. You can't tell them anything, because it's all about me. I'm the center of the universe, and so you can't develop that particular person. No one can ever be direct or honest with them, and so and if you think about it, the last really mess of a hire that you made, they probably weren't a terribly courteous person. So courtesy is about thinking about how your actions affect other people. All right, so these are what I call we're gonna skip forward a minute. I will come back. So you have an applicant, and this applicant, like all the rest, everybody else, we all have talents, whatever they may be, and then we have skills. And we learn our skills either on the job or in a book. And there's no reason to pay someone to learn on the job what they could learn in a book. But there are some things you can't learn in a book. You need to learn them on the job. But attributes are what's going to hook these talents and skills together. So even being from the Midwest, I'm not a basketball fan, but I'm going to talk about two basketball stars that everybody knows, Michael Jordan and Dennis Rodman. And so they both have this amazing just talent to play basketball. And then I'm sure that there's probably more book learning that goes along, videotapes and that kind of thing, and that goes along with being a basketball star than I know. And then there's, most of it's on the job practice. But they both have these amazing talents. So why did Michael Jordan go on to I think I read the other day, the highest earning basketball player ever? I could be wrong on this, but because of his endorsements and everything. And then what's Dennis Rodman up to? Well, there's that. You might have flashed a picture of him in a wedding dress, or he was in North Korea. And let's not sell him short. He might broker world peace. His life's not over yet. Who knows? But nobody could ever when it came to playing basketball, no one could ever manage Dennis Rodman. And those basketball coaches, they're the best at getting performance out of people. So why are there people in the NBA today that don't have nearly the talent of Dennis Rodman? But they're making a better living doing something that he was really good at and probably really liked to do and had this amazing talent for. So certainly a fit, that's a fit. If you're good at it and you like to do that, to me, that's the definition of fit. You're a good fit for the position. Well, attributes link talents and skills together. So let's go back. So what do we want to look for in attributes? Well, we want to look for grit, because a bully or a saboteur does not have grit, because grit leads to accountability, and it's also the ability to fail and get back up and try it again. And bullies and saboteurs and narcissists and what have you, they don't have any grit to them. It's always somebody else's fault. It's never, in fact, a narcissist, if there's like the worst thing in the world that could happen to them, that they would have a public failure. And you're looking for energy in people and the aforementioned curiosity. They like to solve problems. They're adaptable. They trust. If you want to see if you can trust people, do they trust other people? And the courtesy. Do they have courtesy? And so if they have courtesy, they're probably going to have some empathy and openness and kindness. And so we're looking for individuals who will trust us and we can trust them, because that's what it's all about. And so all the people we don't want to hire have in common, sorry for the typo there on have, is it's me, me, me. It's all about me. It's my universe and everybody else is just living in it. So courtesy is really important. So you say, well, how do you find that out? Well, you talk to the parking garage valet. You put them on what I call the elevator test. And some people call it to take them out to lunch and see how they act to everybody around them. Not just the waiter, but if they're standing in a crowded lobby, do they pardon me after you, excuse me? Because those things are ingrained, and you will do them no matter what. The elevator test is kind of like a subway test. You know, the people who stand right in front of the elevator or the subway during rush hour, and especially the subway, there's 200 people on there, and they stand right there in the front of the door, even though there's 200 people trying to get off the train. Or the same thing with an elevator. It never even fathoms to them that there would be anybody else ever getting off that elevator, because they don't think about anybody else other than them. They do the same thing in a same-way train as they do in an elevator. They go in a couple inches and then they stand there, because nobody else would want to get on it or would be going anywhere, would they? They'll stand right in front of the number panel and they'll never say, "What floor, please?" And if they're in the front and somebody from the back needs to get off, they're not going to step out of the subway or the elevator and let the person behind them off. Doesn't matter if they're elderly or blind or in a wheelchair or what have you. They're just not gonna. Nope, they're not. They can just struggle around them because they don't even see that person struggling around them. They have no comprehension. So whether you take them for a walk down a crowded city sidewalk, you put them on a subway, you take them to lunch, you put them on an elevator, you talk to the parking lot valet and everybody they encountered on the way in, find out how they act when nobody is watching them. And I went through this slide in to underscore the importance of how important it is that we don't hire these liars and saboteurs and what have you, because the daily performance of your whole workplace or your team or your department is determined by three things. Do you consider that you have a reason for coming to work, which really doesn't have to have anything to do with the mission statement. It could just be you need a paycheck. That's your purpose. And then how you feel when you come to work and how the group feels. We have all these job descriptions and goals and matrices and policies and procedures. We have no doubt what we're supposed to be accomplishing on any given day. But whether or not we make any movement towards accomplishing those things depends on the three things on this page. And two of them, 2/3 of it, is how people feel. And when you have liars and bullies and saboteurs, they're on the end of the spectrum that there's not a lot of things you're going to be able to do to redirect those individuals, and it's going to be awful trying to get them out of there because there's never no responsibility, accountability, and they bob and they weave and they duck and they're sneaky, and so it's just really difficult to get them out of there, and so we don't want to hire them. And so the things we would like to see movements passed for everyone that we hire, but certainly because otherwise, when you don't see movement past these things, we tend to kind of get mired in the muck, baggage, as others would say. Do they hold grudges from their past jobs? They have, and this is why you really want to connect with people and really drill on questions and have these conversations and give the interview the time that it deserves and talk to the other people, because they interview well, but all of these things will start to kind of seep out the edges about how they might have a grudge on their shoulder and blame a past boss and have some jealousy, and we all get bad bosses and get mistreated at some job that we have, but can we move past it? Because these are the things that if you allow them to fester will really cause problems. There was a fellow one time that I interviewed, and I was probably 35 then, and we didn't hire him. I worked at an engineering firm, and we didn't hire him because he just seemed to have this kind of rage to him. And it was really interesting. I had a reason to run into him after that, and he was still mad we didn't hire him. And the thing was, he was a very well-accomplished, educated, good looking. I mean, everything about him on paper was who we were looking for, but he just seemed to have this long simmering rage. And he said, well, you were always the rich kid anyway. So you probably still see me as the kid on the school bus. And I grew up in I was 5 miles from a one stoplight town. So it's not like I grew up in a big town, but I didn't remember this kid. I didn't remember him at all. And I said, a rich kid? Are you kidding me? And I mean, I wasn't a kid that was wanting for anything, but I never would have thought somebody would have thought of me as a rich kid. I always saw myself when I was a kid as the little chubby girl trying to get the cello down the aisle on the bus. I probably never remembered him because I was so embarrassed about whacking everybody with my cello. And because, when you're a chubby little kid, a cello just makes it a whole lot worse. And I lived out in the country and I always had mud on my shoes. And so it was funny to me that he saw me like that, and I didn't even remember him. And so all these years, all this time, where he had gone on to have really great jobs and become accomplished and all these qualifications, he still had this simmering, and he still remembered me from being a little kid. And I didn't even know who he was. And so you can't get past that stuff. I know it's kind of a crazy little story, but you have people like that in your life too. So confidence is good though. Arrogance, not so much. It's another one of those things that's kind of a fine line between the two of them. But arrogance manifests itself a little bit with this kind of air of superiority. And they cannot admit their total screw-ups without qualifying how somebody else was to blame or what part they made. They need to make you aware that this wasn't entirely of their own responsibility. They always need to have the last word on that. And so it'll come out in their casual remarks. And if you challenge them a little bit about or even use the word failure, from what failure have you learned the biggest lessons? And they might have that packaged up because we all know that's an interview question. But the word failure's going to kind of rub them the wrong way. And they're going to have to qualify that with you. And so ask them about their mistakes, because somebody who's confident tends to think of their failures as being some of their best learning opportunities, and they can tell you what they learned from them and what part they played in that. And so you have to pull it out of the arrogance because they can't see themselves with this idea they have of themselves that they would fail. So confident people know two things: that they thought about what part they had in this failure, so hopefully they didn't have to do it again, and they learned something from it. And they have learned over the years to put the ego aside and see if there's anything they can learn from a situation, even if it stings a little bit. Now, ruffling feathers. I always suggest you move people around a little bit and go a little bit off agenda. Now, I'm not saying be mean to people. My gosh, no. They have taken time out of their day. They've probably got a job. They've, probably had to change into their dress clothes in a restroom somewhere, because we all have casual dress code these days, and they've taken a vacation day, and they've, really come out and, given us the benefit to talk to us about getting a job. But it's very telling if you go off agenda for a little bit, or move somebody, say, oh, sorry, my apologies, we can't use this conference room. Somebody needs it for a last minute important meeting. Let's go on over here. And you put them in just as nice a conference room, but it's a different conference room. And so move them around a little bit. Excuse yourself for maybe 60 seconds. Don't run off for 15 minutes. That's rude. But excuse yourself for a minute and maybe have them talk to someone that's not on the agenda, but not somebody who's really, really important. Like have them talk to somebody who's not so important for 5 or 10 minutes before they get to talk to the CEO. And so you'll see how they react to this, because the average person's going to roll with it. But the arrogance, the malfunction, it's like, well, how could you? Because, after all, it's me, and I'm a very important individual. And we're all very important people. But to them, it's like all right. And so as I said before, and I keep saying, pay as much attention as you can from the moment they enter your property, going all the way back to the parking garage if you can. How do they treat people? And how do they react to their failures and being wrong, and questions about how do they take feedback and learn from their mistakes. And so somebody who you want to hire will tell you how they learn from their mistakes. Somebody you don't want to hire will say, well, I don't think I learned as much from mistakes as I would have learned about when I was the project lead on XYZ. And that would be a better thing to talk about. And so they'll kind of hijack and take over the interview. And if you let them, but don't let them. Go back to what it was that you wanted to talk about. And do bullies carry signs? I would say to some extent yes, because there's an air of disrespect that they almost can't get out from under. And you don't want to let them in your workplace. You know, there's all this idea of, is it bullying or is it harassment? Well, if people are being bullied, then eventually you'll have harassment complaints, because disrespect runs the gamut from being slightly offensive all the way to harassment, and bullies escalate just like, you know, second grade playground bullies, and they always have to have a person they're running, and it's a very manipulative, primal, animalistic behavior. It's like dog pack behavior, except with dogs, they have some honor to them. I'm just kidding. Tomorrow's take your dog. Well, they do, though, actually. Tomorrow's take your dog to work day. I always say we can learn a lot from dogs in the workplace. They know all about teamwork, don't they? Okay, so here's the bully cycle. Think back to the last bully you had, the last manipulative bully, because bullies don't wear T-shirts. They're not, growling ogres. They're some of the most charming, polished people you'll ever meet in your life. But see, you start thinking that you're going crazy working with them because they have what I call the bully cycle. And so you want to look for one particular thing in here. The bully cycle what happens is they'll minimize the fact that anything even happened in the first place. And then if that doesn't work, they'll start to kind of rewrite reality, the facts of the situation. And if that doesn't work, then they'll start to blame other people. And if that doesn't work, then they'll attack someone else. And so you're looking in the interview for times that people minimized or kind of rewrote the facts of a situation or blamed other people. And if you start to see a lot of it, you might start to have somebody who is a bully, and the one thing they tend to have in common is bullies go underground, and so they're kind of passive-aggressive people, to butcher a very complicated psychological theory. But there's passive people who feel like they don't have a right to say what's on their mind. There are angry people who we know what's on their mind because they tell us, and there are assertive people. But then there are passive-aggressive people who I think are the most corrosive in an organization, and they also are often very bullying, is they don't feel like they have a right to say what's on their mind, and they're angry about it. So they go underground. And if they go too far underground, you get into what I'm going to call the saboteur. And so you really want to drill on tough questions with everybody, because passive-aggressive people, bullies, are good at hiding in plain sight. But if you keep drilling, you'll start to see some chips on their shoulders. And sometimes, you don't want to say one thing that is, and say, well, everybody's going to be like this, because this is not necessarily true. But I always worry when I see a really long-term employee who was paid over market and perhaps was promoted for having been somewhere a long time above their skill level, and then all of a sudden they lost a really good job. That's a hard thing to get over. And so I'm always worrying about that. If they bring him in here, are they going to be able to get over that? The narcissists, because we're running out of time, are the what can you do for me people. They are the keeping up with the Joneses people. And they're interesting individuals that I read the other day that sociologists say that narcissism is growing at a rate higher than obesity in this country. And we know what's happening to our waistlines, right? Yeah, narcissism is growing even faster than that. And that is completely frightening because it is the absolute opposite of teamwork. They think they're better than everybody else and have little regard for anyone who can't help them. But on the inside, they don't like themselves. So they don't like themselves, but they consider themselves better than everyone else. But their self-image hinges on how people who they don't like view them. So that's a weird way to live, right? So they're often the easiest to spot because they're superior, but they don't like themselves. They seek that external validation. And little people, like regular people, just stand in the way of what they want. And so they're driven by goals and social status, and they're driven by not being shamed. And so you have to look for that in the interview, and they don't like to spend a lot of their energy talking to people who they don't consider to be the decision makers. But everybody that should be interviewing the person should be part of a decision maker. Saboteurs. They don't have the same moral code if they have any moral code. These are start to become the people that some would call exhibit sociopathic tendencies, meaning they don't really have a conscience. But they're very good at representing what you want. Think Ted Bundy, the famous serial killer who still frightens us, 20, 30 years later? Because he was so good at giving people, he worked for the governor. He drove the governor of Washington around while he was killing women in alleys. So, and everybody liked Ted. And that's how he was so good at what he did, because everybody liked him. He gave everybody what they wanted. And so he was really good at representing what people wanted. And the frightening thing is they can fake, they react to people, and they give them what they want back. And it's kind of hard sometimes to be able to tell if it's legitimate or not. And narcissist always has that arrogance and superiority about them, but not so much these people. And really the best way to do with them is to talk to everybody that came into contact with them and challenge them a little bit, like we've been talking about, because that'll get underneath their skin. I always throw this in. I think this is an interesting thing, just real quick. We're not going to spend too much time on it. It's not necessarily relevant, but it does underscore the importance. And if you read this and you have been through a really difficult situation with a person, then you'll realize, oh my gosh, they were probably doing some of this stuff. I think it was called the Office of Strategic Services, was a precursor to the CIA during World War II, and they were interested in helping citizens' resistance in occupied countries. And so they put out this thing called the Simple Sabotage Field Manual. And so the CIA still has on their website what they call these 5 timeless tips for what you see on the next 2 screens, the 5 timeless tips for simple sabotage. And they say, well, even though that some of the technology is outdated, they still remain a reminder of how easily productivity and order can be undermined by people going underground. And so you can kind of read through this and you start thinking, oh my gosh, that's what those, I've worked with somebody, that's what they did. If you've ever worked with a union, you've seen the simple, I think they have them as past copies out, the simple sabotage. But it's the reason I give you this is a reminder of how easily order and productivity can be undermined, is to make sure that you're not hiring the passive, aggressive, narcissistic people, which we've already talked about this slide. So lastly, just last couple minutes we got here, liars are silly easy to spot. because they're watching you, and they have like crocodile emotions. And they're silly easy to spot if you approach an interview like it's a fact-finding, because they gloss over details. They have to have some reason to be lying to you in the first place. And so they gloss over these details, like the infamous example of during Katrina, there was someone highly placed in FEMA who basically let everyone down. And when the news people started looking back through this person's background, they found out he basically lied about his background. And one example was that he wasn't an assistant town administrator. He was an assistant to the town assistant administrator. And that doesn't sound like much, but that's a big skill gap. So, look, this is where social media, LinkedIn, what have you, can be very helpful. And while you should certainly be aware of the state laws, and you shouldn't go underground, because you're not acting any better than the people we're talking about we don't want to hire if you sneak around and go underground and that kind of thing anyway. But look at the things they put out on LinkedIn and social media and read their posts. I'm always just amazed at the stuff people post on Facebook pages and LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is like the professional Facebook. And go out and read some of the things that they write, and you'll see the way they think. And sometimes these people, liars, will lie just for fun. They, the saying is, if the sky is blue, they'll say it's purple, just for fun. They'll lie about who knows why they do it. Once again, it doesn't matter why to me, it matters what to me. And so circle back and ask a question another way a second time around, or drill on a question, because it's all in the details with a liar. And so facts are the easiest way to trip up a liar. And that's why if you're taking really good notes and thinking that doesn't match up maybe with something they said before, and so you say, well, let's go back, and then just very nicely call the person out. Well, let's go back to, and earlier you said that at XYZ you were in charge of quality. And then now we're talking about quality, and you said you hadn't had very much quality experience. Can you help me understand that discrepancy, please? And then just see what happens, and then compare and contrast the answers among the interviewers. Well, he told me he did quality over at KLM. Well, why, he never said he didn't know anything about quality to me, because if they think that you're believing them, then they won't remember. As Mark Twain said, the easiest thing to do is just tell the truth, then you don't have to remember as much. They'll tell different people different things based on what they think the person wants to hear. All right, and I know the worst thing you can do on a webinar is go over, so we only have a couple more slides. These are your liar towels. They oversell. And have you ever noticed when you be silent, because that just, for some reason, when you're silent in interviews, that just makes people just compelled to start telling you things. They will introduce things they want to get across in inopportune moments. You won't even be talking about budgets, and you'll be talking about quality, and then all of a sudden you'll look down to write down a question, and then it'll say, over at such and such, I revamped the such and such, and we saved such and such money on that. And then you look up and you think, okay, so they don't want to talk about quality anymore, evidently, so you want to stay on it. And so then they'll keep returning to what they want to talk about. And there are those who say that if somebody tells a story the exact same way every time, that they might be lying to you. I don't know if it's a simple matter, sure, they're going to tell it to you the same way every time. If it's something complicated, it's probably going to have a little bit of difference. But once again, if they're saying, I was in charge of quality, and then all of a sudden to another person, no, I really wasn't, then you might have the assistant to the town assistant manager versus the assistant town manager. All right, so Now we have a time for questions. I didn't see any questions come in, and I'm sorry, I meant to tell you in the very beginning that if you had a specific situation to send me a little chat as we went along so I'd know how to work that in. So that's my mistake, and I'm sorry I didn't do that. But now is your chance to ask a question. So Anna, if you could take this back over.